Nobody expected a woman in a white linen blazer to walk up to a military dog and raise a golf club above her head. Nobody expected the man on the other end of the leash to just stand there and take it. And nobody, not one person standing on that manicured lawn at the Ridgecrest Harbor Club that Saturday afternoon expected what would happen next. But that's the thing about people who've spent years operating in the dark, in places that don't appear on maps, doing work that will never make the news. They don't react the way you expect them to. Evan had been out of the field for 11 days. 11 days since his last briefing. 11 days since the smell of aviation fuel and dry desert air. 11 days of leave that his commanding officer had practically ordered him to take. After 18 months of deployments that had left him 20 pounds lighter and considerably quieter than he'd ever been. He wasn't good at vacations. He wasn't sure he remembered how to take one. What he was good at was Ruger. Ruger was a 5-year-old German shepherd, 78 pounds of lean muscle and controlled instinct, with a coat the color of dark charcoal along his back and a face that strangers always described as intense. He had served 2 tours with Evan in places that didn't get discussed at dinner tables. He had cleared rooms, tracked movement through brush so dense it swallowed daylight, and once, had held a position alone for 40 minutes while Evan was extracted with a dislocated shoulder and a fractured rib. They had come home together. They would leave the service together. That was the deal, and Evan had signed papers to make sure of it. The Ridgecrest Harbor Club sat on the western shore of Lake Simcoe, about 90 minutes north of Toronto. A friend had offered Evan his cottage nearby for the 2 weeks. Just go, man, just breathe. It'll do you both good. And so here they were. Ruger was allowed on the club's walking path along the waterfront. It said so, clearly, on the sign at the entrance. Evan had checked. The charity garden show had not been on his agenda. He'd seen the tents going up that morning from the path and had kept walking. But Ruger had slowed near the water's edge, dropped his nose to a patch of reeds, and done the thing he sometimes did. Gone completely still, reading something in the air that Evan couldn't perceive. It wasn't a threat signal. It was curiosity. Evan had let him have a moment. They'd ended up drifting along the fence line of the event without really meaning to. That was when Evan first saw Vivica Montrose. She was easy to spot. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in the particular way of women who have spent significant money ensuring it. She was easy to spot because of the way people moved around her. Not with affection, with awareness. The slight shift of a shoulder when she approached, the half-second delay before anyone spoke. She was the kind of person who entered a space and immediately calibrated everyone in it, and she seemed to enjoy that. She was at the center of a cluster of women near the hydrangea display, holding a glass of sparkling water, laughing at something one of them had said in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her dress was cream silk. Her jewelry was understated and expensive. Her young son, maybe 8, maybe 9, trailed behind her in a pressed polo shirt, looking bored in the specific way children look bored when they've spent their whole lives at events designed for adults. Evan watched none of this with any particular interest. He was watching Ruger, who had lifted his head from the reeds and was now looking toward the event with mild attention. It was a look Evan knew. Not alertness, not anything to act on. Just the dog taking in information, the way he always did, cataloging the world around him with quiet efficiency. A woman near the fence noticed Ruger first. "Oh, what a magnificent dog," she said, and smiled at Evan through the fence slats. Evan nodded. "Thank you. Is he friendly?" "He's calm," Evan said. That was his standard answer. It was more accurate. The woman called to a few others, and before Evan quite knew how it had happened, he and Ruger were being waved through a side gate by a volunteer who seemed delighted to have a German shepherd at what was otherwise a very typical charity garden show. A local landscaping company had sponsored the event. The proceeds went to a children's hospital in Barrie. There was a raffle and a string quartet and small sandwiches on silver trays. Ruger moved through it all with the same quiet deliberateness he brought to everything. He did not lunge at the sandwiches. He did not bark at the string quartet. When children approached, which they did immediately and in numbers, he sat and allowed himself to be patted, ears back, tail moving in a slow, dignified arc. One little girl of about 4 fell against his side, and he simply absorbed her weight and remained still. Evan accepted a coffee from a volunteer and stood near the hydrangeas and thought that maybe, this was what leave was supposed to feel like. He should have known better. There are people in the world who cannot tolerate things that are not theirs receiving attention. It's a particular kind of unhappiness, and it tends to make itself known in small ways before it makes itself known in large ones. A tightening at the corner of the mouth. A glass set down a little too firmly. A voice that rises a quarter tone above what the situation calls for. Evan noticed the shift in Vivica before she moved. He was trained to notice shifts. The way her chin lifted when she registered the cluster of people around Ruger. The way her eyes moved over the scene and found something in it that displeased her. Her son had broken away from her side and was crouching near Ruger, reaching out tentatively, and Ruger had dipped his head toward the boy's hand with the careful patience he reserved for the very young. Fletcher. Her voice carried across the garden with practiced precision. Come away from that. The boy Fletcher didn't move immediately. He was too caught up in the miracle of a large dog who had chosen to be gentle with him. Fletcher. Sharper now, the boy stood, but he didn't come. He kept his eyes on Ruger. Vivica crossed the lawn with purpose. The cluster of women parted for her. She arrived at the edge of the small crowd around Ruger and addressed the air above Evan's left shoulder rather than his face. This animal shouldn't be here, she said. This is a private event. He was invited in, said the volunteer who had waved them through, suddenly looking like she regretted it. By whom? You? Vivica looked at the volunteer the way a weather system looks at a small boat. Do you know what it takes to get a table at this event? Do you understand the donor list? She turned back to the air above Evan's shoulder. I'm going to need you to remove this dog. Evan took a sip of his coffee. We'll head out in a few minutes, he said. His voice was even. It always was. Now, Vivica said. Ruger was sitting. He had not moved. He was looking at nothing in particular, the way he did when he was waiting for a command, for a signal, for the situation to resolve itself. His breathing was audible and slow. Vivica looked at the dog the way she had looked at the volunteer. He's shedding, she said. On everything. Evan looked at the lawn. He looked at the hydrangeas. He looked at the sky over Lake Simcoe, which was a particular shade of northern Ontario blue that he hadn't seen in 18 months. We'll be out of your way shortly, he said. What happened next happened quickly. Later, people who had been standing nearby would describe it differently. Some said Ruger had moved toward Fletcher again. Some said he hadn't moved at all. Some said Vivica's son had reached out for the dog a second time, had actually touched his ear, and that Vivica had reacted to that. One woman, who gave her name to no one but mentioned it quietly to a friend on the drive home, said she thought the dog had simply been sitting there, doing nothing at all when Vivica's arm came down. What was not disputed was this. Vivica Montrose, in front of approximately 40 witnesses, struck Ruger across the back and shoulders with a decorative walking stick she had picked up from a display table near the hydrangeas. It was lacquered bamboo, about 3 feet long, and she brought it down hard, not once but twice, with the precise and startling force of someone who had decided she was entirely within her rights. The sound it made was not something any of the witnesses would forget quickly. Ruger did not yelp. He did not snap. He lurched forward and dropped. His hind legs buckled and he caught himself and held, trembling finely, the way a structure holds after a hit it wasn't built to absorb. Not toward Vivica, toward Ruger. He was on one knee in the grass before the second blow had finished landing, one hand flat along Ruger's flank, feeling for the flinch response, reading the dog's body the way he had learned to read a situation, fast, clean, without emotion getting in the way of information. Ruger's breathing had changed. Not labored, elevated. Adrenaline response. He pressed his nose into Evan's shoulder and held it there. Evan stayed still. Around him, the garden show had gone completely silent. Then someone said, "Oh my God," in a small, horrified voice. Then several people said it. Vivica lowered the walking stick. She looked around at the faces turned toward her and seemed, for the first time, to calculate the weight of what she had done against the audience witnessing it. Something shifted in her, not remorse. Recalibration. "The dog was lunging," she said. Her voice had regained its composure with remarkable speed. "My son was in danger. Any reasonable person would. He wasn't lunging." The woman who said it was older, maybe 70, with white hair and the straight posture of someone who had not been intimidated by anyone in 40 years. She pointed at the spot where Ruger had been sitting. "He was sitting right there. We all saw it. I saw what I saw," Vivica said. Evan stood. He was not a particularly dramatic person. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture. He simply stood up from the grass to his full height, which was considerable, and he looked at Vivica Montrose for the first time directly, and something in the quality of that gaze, the complete absence of reaction, the absolute stillness of it, made several people near her take a small step back. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. He placed a card on the table next to the hydrangea display. He said quietly, "If Ruger needs veterinary care, that's the number. We're done here." He attached Ruger's lead and walked toward the gate. He did not look back. Some people, when they walk away from something, are clearly shaken. Their stride gives them away. Their shoulders carry the story. Evan's stride said nothing. It never did. But his hand, on the lead, was wrapped just a little tighter than usual, and Ruger, despite everything, was matching his pace exactly, step for step, the way he always did. There are places inside a person that don't show up in any file, not in the performance reviews, not in the commendations, not in the careful language of the after-action reports. The place where the job lives when you're not on the job, the place where you keep the faces of the men and dogs who came home with you and the ones who didn't. Evan had learned a long time ago to keep that place very quiet, to not let anything in that didn't need to be there. That night, in the cottage, he sat on the porch with Ruger's head in his lap and a glass of water he hadn't touched, and the specific silence of someone who is very carefully not feeling something. The lake was flat. The loons were out. Someone 2 docks over was having a barbecue and laughing about something. Ruger's breathing was normal. The vet in Barry, an older man named Dr. Theriot, who had worked with working dogs for 30 years and asked no unnecessary questions, had examined him that afternoon and found bruising along the upper back, no structural damage. "He's tougher than he looks, doctor," Theriot had said, and then had added, looking at Evan, "So are you, I'd imagine." Yvonne hadn't responded to that. He sat on the porch and thought about the rules of engagement, about what you were permitted to do and what you were not, about the discipline of standing still when every cell in your body was organized towards something else entirely, about the fact that the discipline wasn't weakness, it was the whole point. It was the thing that made you different from the thing you were trained to stop. He did not think about Vivica Montrose very much. He did not have a plan for her. He had her number on a card on the kitchen counter and an intention to call the next morning and report the incident to the club's management, and beyond that he wasn't sure what he expected. Not much. He had learned not to expect much from institutions when it came to the protection of things that couldn't speak for themselves. He didn't know, sitting there on that porch, that Vivica Montrose's evening was already unraveling at a speed she had not anticipated. The 40 witnesses at the charity garden show had not remained silent. People who attend charity garden shows are, as a demographic, not generally inclined toward viral video, but there is always someone with a phone, and in this case there were 3. The footage was not professionally shot. It was shaky and close and included a great deal of ambient noise, and at one point a partial view of someone's elbow. It was also in the way that footage of a person striking a calm dog in front of a crowd is always undeniable, completely clear. By 9 that evening, the name Vivica Montrose had appeared on 2 local Facebook groups, 1 community notice board, and a thread on a regional forum that had, at its peak, 412 replies. By 11, it had reached a journalist at a Barrie radio station, who had a personal opinion about animal cruelty and a morning show with a reasonably devoted listenership. By midnight, it had reached a reporter at a Toronto outlet who covered human interest stories and was very good at finding a thread worth pulling. None of this was Evan's doing. Vivica Montrose had, for 37 years, built her reputation on a foundation of strategic charity work, very good public relations, and the careful management of who knew what about her. She sat on the board of a foundation that supported women in business. She was photographed at fundraisers. She had a publicist whose entire job was to ensure that the version of Vivica that reached the public was the one Vivica preferred. That publicist's phone began ringing at 10:45 p.m. The next morning came in clean and cool, the way August mornings do in cottage country when the summer is starting to tip toward fall. Evan woke early, as he always did, made coffee, and took Ruger out along the waterfront path. The dog moved well. A little stiff on the right side, favoring it slightly, but moving. Evan had been told to watch for that, and he watched. They did 2 kilometers and came back and sat on the dock. Evan's phone had notifications he hadn't opened. He opened them now. He read them without visible reaction, which was the only way he read anything. Then he set the phone face down on the dock beside him and looked at the lake for a long moment, and Ruger put his chin on Evan's knee and looked at the lake too. Well, Evan said to no one in particular, the Ridgecrest Harbor Club had released a statement by 9 a.m., expressing that the conduct of the previous afternoon was inconsistent with the values of the club and its members, and that an investigation was underway. The statement also noted that service animals and trained working dogs were welcome at all club events, and that the club stands unequivocally with the family of all those who serve. Vivica's publicist had released a counterstatement by 9:15, describing the incident as a moment of protective instinct in the face of a perceived threat to a child, and noting that Vivica was deeply committed to animal welfare causes and had always been a vocal advocate for responsible pet ownership. The counterstatement had been received by the Internet in approximately the way that counterstatements of that nature are generally received. The president of the foundation Vivica sat on had made a quiet call to Vivica's personal number at 9:45. The details of that call were not public, but by 10 o'clock, Vivica's name had been removed from the foundation's board listing on its website. Vivica's husband, Graham Montrose, who ran a commercial real estate firm in Toronto, and whose name appeared on several building permits and rezoning applications currently before City Council, had been reached by the Toronto Reporter and asked for comment. He had declined comment. The reporter had mentioned the video. Graham had declined comment again. The reporter had mentioned that the video had approximately 40,000 views on one platform alone and was expected to double by afternoon. There had been a pause on Graham's end of the line. Evan knew none of this in real time. He was on a dock with his dog. He was, in his methodical and private way, dealing with something he didn't have a name for. The particular exhaustion of having held yourself perfectly still while something that mattered to you was being harmed. He had done it in the field. He had done it in briefing rooms. He had done it yesterday on a lawn in front of 40 people in garden hats. It was never easy. It was never meant to be easy. The point was to do it anyway. He had his coffee. He had the lake. He had Ruger's chin on his knee. It was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. The call came at 11:27. He didn't recognize the number. He almost didn't pick up. He picked up. "Is this Evan Stahl?" A woman's voice, controlled but only just. "It is," he said. A pause. Then, "This is Vivica Montrose." He didn't say anything. "I watched the footage," she said. There was footage. "I'm sure you know that." "I didn't go looking for it," he said. Another pause. Longer. "I want to explain." She started and then stopped. Something shifted in her voice. Not the composure she'd had on the lawn. Something older and more tired than that. "I'm not going to explain it. There isn't an explanation that." She stopped again. Evan waited. He was very good at waiting. "How is the dog?" she said finally. It came out flat, like a question that was also something else. "He'll be fine," Evan said. "He's tough." "I could see that," she said quietly. "I could see that, and I did it anyway." He didn't fill the silence that followed. He let it sit there between them. "Fletcher hasn't spoken to me since yesterday afternoon," she said. Her voice was very carefully not breaking my son. He loves dogs. I reacted, and it was wrong, and he was right there watching, and she stopped. "He told me," she said, "that Ruger wasn't doing anything wrong. He kept saying it. He was right there. He saw the whole thing." Evan looked out at the lake. "He was right," Evan said. "I know," she said. "There are moments in a life when you can see, quite clearly, the person someone might have been, if things had gone differently." The version of Vivica Montrose on the phone at 11:27 on a Sunday morning, stripped of the publicist and the composure and the 40 years of carefully constructed surfaces, was not quite that person. It was too late for that. But she was adjacent to her. She was, at minimum, aware of her. Evan did not feel sorry for her. He was not built for that kind of uncomplicated sympathy. But he did feel something, which was the recognition that most of the worst things people did were not done by monsters. They were done by people who had forgotten, for a moment or permanently, that the world extended beyond themselves. "What are you going to do?" she said, not threateningly, as a genuine question. "I've already filed a report with the club," he said. "I'll be speaking with Animal Services tomorrow." "That's fair," she said. "Just that. No pushback, no recalibration. You'll need to deal with whatever comes next on your end," he said. "I can't help you with that." "No," she said. "No, I know." There was a pause. Then she said, "Is there something I can do? For the dog? A donation? To the vet, or to, I don't know. Whatever organization supports them." Evan thought about it. He wasn't cynical enough to dismiss the offer entirely, and he wasn't naive enough to imagine it was purely motivated by guilt. "Look up the Canadian Military Working Dog Service Support Society," he said. "They do good work." "I will," she said. "And talk to your son," he said. "Whatever else is happening, talk to your son." A long pause. "Yes," she said. "You're right," she hung up. Ruger had not moved through the entire call. He was still chin down on Evan's knee, watching the water. A loon surfaced about 20 meters out and regarded them briefly, and dove again. Evan finished his coffee. He thought about the thing Dr. Theriot had said. "So are you, I'd imagine?" He thought about 18 months of deployments and the weight he'd lost and the quiet he'd come back with. He thought about the fact that he still didn't entirely know how to take a vacation. He thought about Ruger, who had been struck twice with a lacquered bamboo stick and had not reacted, had not broken, had held his position and waited for the signal from the person he trusted. There was something in that. There was always something in that. What happened at the Ridgecrest Harbor Club did not end with a phone call. These things rarely do. Animal Services conducted a formal review. The club's management met with Vivica's family, and pending the outcome of the review, was suspended. Graham Montrose's rezoning applications moved through council without incident, as they likely would have regardless. But the coverage had found its way into corners of the business community, where these things are noticed, and noticed quietly, and remembered. Vivica's foundation board seat did not return. The counter-statement from the publicist was archived in the particular way that counter-statements that make things worse are archived, which is to say it continued to be referenced long after anyone had any reason to care about the original. None of that was justice, exactly. But it wasn't nothing. Fletcher Montrose turned 9 3 weeks later. He had, according to a woman who volunteered at the Barrie Animal Shelter and had no connection to any of the parties involved, but happened to overhear a conversation, recently been asking his parents about getting a dog, specifically a German Shepherd. Evan would never know that. He was already back on base. He had finished his leave on a Wednesday, packed the cottage, shaken his friend's hand, and driven south on the 400, with Ruger asleep across the back seat, and the radio tuned to a country station out of Aurelia that he didn't particularly like but didn't change. He had reported back. He had attended his first debrief in 11 days and sat at the table with the same stillness he brought to everything and answered the questions that were asked and offered nothing additional. Someone asked him how the leave had been. "Quiet," he said. They had laughed for reasons he didn't entirely follow. Ruger's file, updated by Dr. Theriot and forwarded to the base veterinary unit, noted the incident with clinical brevity. Bruising, upper dorsal region, full recovery, no lasting impairment to function or temperament. Return to duty, cleared. The base vet, a woman named Captain Arsenault, no relation to anyone in this story, just a coincidence of names, had read the summary twice, looked at Evan over her reading glasses and said, "This dog is something else." "Yeah," Evan said. "So are you," she said. He didn't respond to that either. But this time, if you were watching, and the narrator was watching, there was something very small at the corner of his mouth that might, in better lighting, have been a smile. There is a particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. That doesn't need to. That walks into a room and knows exactly what it is and has nothing to prove to anyone. It doesn't raise its voice, it doesn't perform, it holds its position, absorbs what comes, and waits. It was shaped, in this case, like a man in his early 30s on leave for the first time in 18 months, standing on a lawn with a coffee going cold in his hand, watching a dog he trusted breathe through something that shouldn't have happened. It was also shaped like a 70-pound German shepherd who had been struck twice, hard, and had turned and pressed his nose into a shoulder and stayed. The narrator has no tidy lesson to offer. The world is not a place where lessons come tied with a bow. But there is something worth saying about the kind of loyalty that isn't contingent, that doesn't keep score, doesn't calculate, doesn't ask what it gets in return. Ruger never decided to trust Evan. He simply did. The way that a river simply runs in one direction. The way that some things are just true without being argued. Evan never decided to protect Ruger. He simply did. And on a dock in cottage country, on a blue morning with the loons out, and the summer going slowly toward fall, with a phone face down beside him and 40-something thousand people watching a video he'd never asked to be in. He sat with the dog's chin on his knee and the coffee in his hand and the lake doing what lakes do, holding still, holding everything, and it was, for a moment, enough.